What percentage of the people in Utah are Mormons? That's the question for you. What percentage of people in Utah are Mormons? Because I don't know if you asked me and I didn't know what I was about to show you, I don't know what I would say. I would probably think it's a pretty big percentage. Um, and I guess I'll just toss it out there. I'm looking at the comments as I'm saying this. I see numbers like 70%, 80%, because it sure seems like Utah's where all the Mormons are, more or less. And even if it's dropping, where is it? And I'm seeing a lot of big numbers. And I will show you one thing right here. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune. Here we go. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune a couple of years ago, 2020. And this is what they said. Utah is now 60.68% Latter-day Saint. This stat relies on state population estimates and could change after the official 2020 census count. They were getting this number from the Mormon Church. And I'll show you this right here. The blue shows you how many new Mormons were getting added to the numbers. And part of the story was that these numbers, as you could see here, they go down as you move to the right. And that's a cause for alarm if you're Mormon. But the bottom part of this graph here, percent LDS in Utah, the percentage was going down over the years. So from 2013 to 2019, the percentage was going down from like 63% down to like 60%. Like, notice the y-axis there. It doesn't go down to 0, but it's going down from like 63 to 60. So it was declining. But those are the Mormon Church's numbers. And the Salt Lake Tribune was reporting that. So again, that story from 2020 said the Mormon population in Utah is now at 60% and it's on the decline. Okay, interesting. But that's not the story here. The story I want to share with you is there's a paper that just got published by some sociologists, and check out the headline here in this peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Religion and Demography. Mormons are no longer a majority in Utah. I'm going to pull up this article for you so you could see it. Different way. According to those researchers, Mormons are not the majority in Utah anymore. They put the number at 42%. 42%, which is insanely small compared to what I thought it would be. You know what I mean? Where are they getting this number from? This 42% number? Well, I want to say, these are from sociologists Ryan Cragen, Bethany Gull, and Rick Phillips. They wrote this article. It just got published before Christmas. But what they say in their paper is that there are basically two ways to calculate the percentage of Mormons in Utah. One of them is you could take the numbers the Mormon Church gives you and like divide it by whatever the census says this is how many people are in Utah, right? Mormons divided by everyone in Utah, you get the percentage. That's pretty straightforward. That's what I just showed you with the Salt Lake Tribune, where it said it's at 60.7%. Lower than before, but still a majority. But the other way to show you the percentage of Mormons in Utah is to just ask. You could do a survey and say, what religion do you identify with? And we have an example of that. In 2022, the Public Religion Research Institute did a survey. That's probably the most recent one. And they said that Mormons comprised 55% of people in Utah. So lower than what the Mormon Church was saying, but still a majority. What the paper says is that both of those methods have serious flaws. To begin with, the Mormon Church has a long history of giving overinflated membership numbers. Basically, if you were, let's say, 5 years old, if you were baptized and confirmed as a child, then the LDS Church considers you a member forever, even if you stop believing as an adult, unless you tell them formally, take my name off your membership list. But if you were baptized and confirmed, you're on the list for life. So they consider that person a member. What if you're a toddler who's not eligible for baptism yet because you're not like 8 years old? I think that's the age. If you're a toddler, but you're born in a Mormon family, you're also considered a Mormon Church member. Basically, everyone who's like Mormon adjacent is considered a Mormon unless there's a really good reason to not call them a Mormon. So they're overestimating the numbers. Okay, so that's a problem. By the way, according to the articles I'm quoting here, I can't show it to you, otherwise I would. Scholars have noted that local ward rosters are unusable as sampling frames for surveying Mormons. The church's claimed membership total may exceed the number of self identified Mormons by 50%. They may be off by 50%. And in fact, the Salt Lake Tribune, in that article I showed you where it pegged it at 60%, they actually noted some problems as well. For example, I'm quoting here, one reporter found that the church claimed more members in one Utah county than there were residents of the county. That's how bad the church's rolls are. Okay, so that's number one. What's the problem with self-reported numbers? Well, sometimes the sample sizes are very small, which makes it a little more inaccurate. And also, and this is true of Catholics and evangelicals and whatnot, there are a lot of religious believers who may not believe in God anymore, or they may not believe in organized religion, even if they do believe in God, or they just don't attend religious services anymore. They're lapsed in a way, but maybe they call themselves Mormon for like cultural reasons or family reasons. So, should you count the people who like they say I'm Mormon, but I don't believe anymore? Are they Mormon? They're not, but they might be counted as some. Or what if they're just like, I don't believe any of this stuff anymore, but they don't go through the formal process of getting their name off the list? They're still called Mormons. They might self identify as Mormons. So those surveys have problems too. So what the researchers did is they conducted their own survey. And this I will show you right here. They conducted their own survey of estimated Mormon population in Utah over time, and they took it from a bunch of different sources. And this is what they found. Check this out right here. Estimated Mormon population in Utah over time. And whoops, there we go. Check out this list. From 2001, they said it was actually 53% Mormon based on the numbers they had access to. And look what happens every year until we get down to 2022. Right down there, right above my head here. In 2022, they say Utah was 42% Mormon based on their survey, based on the people they were able to talk to and their estimates of the numbers. They had a much smaller margin of error for the sort of survey that they did. But that they say, even if that's not perfectly accurate, it's definitely better than some of the surveys we have available. So that's where they're coming from. So that would be incredible, by the way. The headline to take away from all this is that Mormons are not the majority in Utah anymore. And more importantly, check this out. They have not been in the majority, according to these researchers, since what year are we going to? 2007, when they were 49.9% of the state. They haven't been in the majority since 2007, and it's dropping and dropping and dropping. So fascinating. So now the question is, why would that be happening? Why is the percentage of Mormons getting lower? And the researchers offered 3 reasons for this shift. And these are just the 3 biggest reasons. There are always smaller factors, like maybe people are sick of all the headlines about the Mormon church being like evil and hoarding money and stuff like that. But they had 3 reasons. One is secularization. Basically, religion is becoming less important in the lives of a lot of Americans, and that applies to Mormons in Utah too. They actually had a graph here. I'm going to show you my version of the graph because I made it separately. But look at these numbers. On the left, what you're looking at on that side of the screen, on the vertical axis, that's what religion people say they were when they were 12 years old. So like their family's religion. The top part of the graph is what religion they are now. And you could see in the very top row, the people who said I was Mormon or LDS when I was 12, 24% of them, I'm looking at the yellow box here, 24% of them now say they are no religion at all. That is a huge jump from people who say they were religious believers, Mormons specifically, when they were younger, but who are not anymore. And that's part of it. So people are just becoming more secular. So that's one reason this shift is happening. The more people leave the faith, the less pressure there is for other fence sitters to remain in the religion too, for like social reasons. So like it's kind of a snowball effect right there. So secularization, that's reason number one. Number two, fertility. Basically, Mormons are having fewer babies than they used to. If you know Mormon families, like in your neighborhood, in your life, it's probably a family with like 7 or 8 kids. A lot of them certainly have that sort of experience, but that's no longer what's happening in a lot of Mormon families. According to the statistic that these researchers provided, in 2001, people in Utah as a whole, people in Utah had about 20 births for every 1,000 people. By 2022, that number is down to 14 births per 1,000 people. Not just Mormon specifically, but this is Utah overall. Fewer babies, though, means fewer automatic Mormons. And it also means Utah is starting to look more and more like the rest of the country when it comes to fertility rates. People in Utah have more babies than the rest of the country, but like by how much? Less and less each year. So if Mormons aren't having as many babies as they used to, they don't have as many people to add to that membership list, and the old ones are dying off. So the replacement is not happening like it used to. The third reason these researchers gave is migration. That Mormons used to go to Utah because that's where you find Mormons. And if you were not Mormon, you left Utah because it was surrounded by Mormons. And you wanted to go a place where you could like not have that. But that's no longer the case. First of all, the Mormon church, to its credit, I guess, has established Mormon temples outside Utah. There's a lot of them with more on the way. You know what I mean? So if you live in a big city, odds are you're going to be able to find a Mormon community no matter where you are in the United States. So that's one. So there's less of a reason to have to move to Utah to find other Mormons. But at the other end of this spectrum, Utah is kind of a neat place to live these days, right? Like the beautiful landscape, the national parks. It's a cheaper place to live compared to other options. So you have a lower cost of living, you have economic opportunity. So you have a lot of people moving to Utah for reasons that have nothing to do with the Mormon church. And what that does is the Utah population rises, but the Mormon population isn't keeping pace because some of them are leaving, the birth rates aren't making up for it. So the percentage of Mormons in Utah goes down. So all three of these things are all coming together to lower the percentage of Mormons in Utah. They actually have this neat little graph that I just want to share with you. This is in the paper. It's just fun to read because it takes a second to make sense of it. But look at this. They're saying, if you look at the bottom, Mormon majority in Utah. Let's see. Declining percentage Mormonism increases secularization. What happens to secularization? It reduces fertility because atheists don't have as many babies as everyone else. Religious people, devoutly religious people, Catholics, Mormons, what have you, evangelicals, the Duggars, they make up for the averages. They have high fertility rates because if they have babies, they have tons of babies. They don't stop at one. They treat babies like Pringles chips. So if you're secular and you're living in a secular area, that reduces your fertility. Declining fertility reduces the percentage who are Mormon, which reduces the Mormon majority. What about migration? In migration to Utah also reduces the percentage of Mormons. So like it's all a giant feedback loop. It all goes back to lowering the percentage of Mormons in Utah, which I find fascinating. Just as a sociological issue, this is so interesting. So one thing, and by the way, the Mormon church knows this is happening. How could they not know this is happening? Of course they know this stuff is happening. And what happens when the Mormon church starts to lose power because it no longer controls an entire state? That's a fun question to answer because as it stands, according to a survey in Deseret News, nearly 3/4 of people in Utah now support same-sex marriage, which the Mormon church does not. And that's a huge jump. Like, what does that say about the influence of the Mormon church these days in that state? And also, I mean, the Mormon church kind of dominates the state's culture and politics. It's a Republican-run state. But if non-Mormons find it easier to live in Utah and they start families with like-minded partners, like that snowball effect, it means more diversity. It means more types of people, not just Mormons, living there. I actually asked Ryan Cragen, one of the researchers who wrote the paper, is this trend actually accelerating? Like, are they going to just keep lowering that percentage of Mormons in Utah, or have we kind of hit the floor there? And he said he thinks it is accelerating. He told me it is. I'm going to share this with you here, just so you could read it. This is what he shared with me. It is now much easier to leave the religion because there are plenty of people uh, who are not LDS, who you could spend time with, who share your views. Leaving the church in the 1980s would have been challenging because everyone would know you were no longer a member. You would be socially isolated. Today, while family who are still members might engage in some social isolation and worry that the person who has left may try to persuade others to leave or be a bad influence on those who have stayed, there are plenty of support groups in Utah for ex-Mormons and plenty of non-Mormons who are happy to welcome ex-Mormons to their social circles. So yes, declining religiosity is self-reinforcing. And isn't that cool to see? And the more we learn about how the Mormon church has shielded itself from accountability when it comes to sexual abuse, hoarded more than $100 billion meant to help others, and been criticized by some of its more famous members, it becomes really hard to control the levers of power. Which is not to say the church isn't going to try to reverse the trend here. What Ryan Cragen also mentioned is like, we have seen the church try to like stop the bleeding, for lack of better words. For example, it used to be that if you were Mormon, you had to go on your like 2-year mission trip. And for men, that happened when they were 19. For women, they had to be 21. Well, guess what happened when you start your mission trips at 19 and 21? Some of those kids, they end up going to college for at least a year. And what happens in college when, especially if you don't go to like BYU, you're surrounded by people who are not Mormon. And you start to think, you know what? I don't know if I'm religious anymore. I don't think my stuff makes sense. And so that gap year, or not a gap year, but a year where you went to college, that was actually hurting them. So they decided several years ago, we're going to lower the age of missionaries to 18 and 19, men than women. Try to avoid those kids going off to college before they are indoctrinated more. Also, the LDS Church actually said recently there is legislation to protect marriage equality if the Supreme Court decides to turn that one back over to the states. The Mormon Church actually said officially, we support same-sex rights. We don't want the Supreme Court to overturn it. We think if you had a same-sex marriage, that shouldn't be taken away from you if a state decides to do that, which that's quite a switch from a very anti-gay organization. Not a huge deal. It's not like it was a leap for them, but it was surprising. And obviously the church still wants Mormons to have a lot of babies. So I don't know. I found that interesting. Like, Utah is not a blue state, not even close. But as these demographics shift and it becomes less Mormon and less culturally red, you have to wonder what's going to happen over the course of years. Like last year, or in 2022, I believe, there was an election for U.S. Senate, and Mike Lee was the Republican who was running for re-election. And who did Democrats choose to represent them? It wasn't even a Democrat. They said, we're going to caucus with we'll all vote for this independent nominee, Evan McMullin, who is a Mormon, but isn't mega crazy. And we're all just going to throw our votes to him. And he lost. Evan McMullin lost, but he got like more than 40% of the vote, which is to say, the shift is happening. There will be a time when Republicans don't have total control of that state. And again, that goes back to Mormons are losing their power. The Mormon church is losing its influence. That's a good change, even if it'll take a while. You know what I mean? So interesting, fascinating story. I'll have more about this on my website. And if you're watching this clip later on, I'll have the link for the article about this and the paper in the description below.